Yes. So we're going to give the meeting a couple more minutes. There's a few more people milling in, and then we'll start about 5 after.
Even though I'm wearing a mask, I'll use my loud voice here. Hopefully you can hear me. And on that subject, thank you for being here, and thank you for wearing masks. It's church's policy to have them on when we're in, so I appreciate you being on board with that with us. My name is Tom Berry. I'm the pastor here at Bethany Presbyterian Church, and on behalf of our congregation, I just want to welcome you. We are happy that we can be a part of this. We are happy that we can offer up space. And we are actually very happy and excited that there's an opportunity to share information. We know that this is a very complicated endeavor, and so we feel it is important to offer space and opportunities to share information and to let each other be heard. So again, welcome, and we're glad you're here.
So we're going to go ahead and get started here a little bit. So briefly, we're going to, Lisa Michaelis is going to talk a little bit about Foundry Village and what's going on there and some of the successes, and then how it works into the whole continuum of care and in the idea of an urban campground. And then Sam's going to talk about what else has been going on in the community a little bit to give you a little background on the different projects that are happening and that are in the works. And then I'm going to go through a PowerPoint presentation to talk about the campground that exists in Medford, which we're trying to copy, and then a little bit about what we're trying to do as well. And then we'll go to questions and answers. So first off, I want to say thanks to Tom. He's been, and Bethany Presbyterian, he's been really easy to work with. It's been lovely to call him and say, hey, can we have a meeting in your space? And he said yes to it both times. And he's made it very easy. We really appreciate that, Tom. Thank you very much. And so we're going to try to capture questions and comments. And so back there on those two tables are 3x5 index cards and pins. So if you have any questions or comments, please write them down. And then towards the end of this, we'll read them out to both the people on Zoom and then so we can capture them. Because the last meeting we had, we weren't able to capture questions and comments. And there were a couple bits of intelligent thought that we should have captured to be able to move forward with, and we didn't. So please do that. And there's also a sheet of FAQs back there as well, so if you want that. And then if you want further communications from us on this, please also put your name and your email back there as well on those sign-up sheets. So first, Lisa's going to come up and talk a little bit about Foundry Village and their successes and whatnot. Lisa?
Thank you. Just what we've got going currently, we have 4 women and 9 men. We've approved 4 men and 1 more woman to come in on Friday of this week. 3 of the women are employed, 4 of the men are employed. Can I move this?
Sure. The small microphone is for the Zoom world.
I just got out there. So what I was sharing is we have 4 women and 9 men. And we have approved 4 men and 1 more woman to come in this Friday. Can I pull this down maybe? Is this helpful? Thank you. 3 of the women are employed and 4 of the men are employed. 1 woman has her second round job interview tomorrow. 2 individuals are in their 60s and receiving Social Security. One of those gentlemen volunteers many hours a week for a local community outreach ministry. 1 man recently completed his peer support specialist training, and he volunteers many hours a week for a local community partner. Another man has connected with Equus, and he's interested in obtaining his welding certificate in Oregon. He had his welding certificate in California years ago, but it expired. So now that we've been open for about 4 months, trusting relationships are being built, the guests are more vulnerable and their fears, dreams, goals are coming out. Many have shared that they were exhausted on the streets. All of their energy was put into finding simple things like where are they going to go to the bathroom? Where are they going to eat? How are they going to prepare whatever they can acquire? So now that they're in a warm, safe, dry place, they're able to focus on the steps that are going to bring stability to their lives. Through safe shelter and case management, their hope is being restored. Since November, we've scheduled 36 interviews for Foundry Village. 3 of those individuals didn't show up. 6 were determined to not be a good fit for this program level. 2 individuals have been approved and are waiting for the next time to become available. We currently have 57 individuals on the wait list. 2 people have left of their own volition. 2 have successfully exited to independent living. 1 guest died of natural causes. And unfortunately, we've had to exit 4 individuals for non-compliance with the program. It's excruciatingly difficult to make those decisions to exit a non-compliant guest or to not accept someone into the program. Foundry Village, is based on the model of Hope Village in Medford. It's a more independent living program. Participants in Medford typically move up through the campground and the shelter and have completed successfully and are ready for this next level. In Grounds Pass, we don't have a campground or specific programs that can accommodate these greater needs. Someone's coming straight from the park or the mountain into an independent living program, and they struggle. It requires staff to be very diligent. It's a lot more work required to help these people get back on their feet. Given time, these same individuals will acclimate and stabilize at a campground and could be ready for a housing or village project. It's a critical step for success. So we need to meet them where they are and walk with them on their journey to a restored life. And none of these programs are going to solve all of our problems, but they do each make a difference. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share my work with you.
Can Lisa take questions?
Are we going to do questions?
So Lisa, you mentioned you had a few people there that volunteer. I imagine Michael is one of them?
He's not volunteering right now.
Not right now.
Right.
So I would like to just jump right from the beginning to what I think is right going to be the end. the Grants Pass. So you got 3 men that are volunteering in this society here today. And I'm asking Michael the question, that he's giving me a thumbs up, that he would, and that is what I believe is the holding point for getting the urban campground open here at Grants Pass. And they're waiting for 3 volunteers, or volunteers to run 3 shifts a day. This is Janice Stanley coming from Foundry Village.
Oh, the warming center. Are you talking about the warming center?
He's a volunteer and he's available to do that. So the warming center, correct. So that's, because I'm looking for that as being the only, that's my main question at the end of the period tonight, is the only thing keeping the warming center open is volunteering people to run this.
No, that's not exact. Right, that's not exactly all that's required. It is a staffing issue, and we are actively seeking volunteers. When you said, is Mike volunteering, I think I was confused on what you were asking. When I'm talking about volunteers, I'm referring to the individuals who are living at Foundry Village and their activities in the community.
Okay, we're getting sidetracked for that one. Sam, you want to come up for a sec? For the people on Zoom, the gentleman in the audience asked a specific question that related to the possible opening of the Grants Pass Warming Center or shelter, and that's in the works. Sam, I think, will be able to address that a little bit, and his question was about volunteers and the need there. Sam, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, so thank you. So probably 3 things, Mark, with what you're addressing: the warming center, the shelter, and then the urban campground. And we'll talk more about the urban campground throughout the day. The warming center ran for 2 nights in end of January. We're probably at the temperature thresholds for the city for that warming center again to open. I don't know the location. I haven't heard anybody talk about when and how to get that open despite hitting those thresholds. That would be a combination of staff loaned from other programs and volunteers like it was last time around, if that were to move forwards. The shelter would be a longer-term program, 90 days probably is what that would look at running, and that would be a partnership between UCAN and Rogue Retreat. I don't want to speak for either partner, but I think that you touched on some of what I've been hearing too, that they're to getting that open, and a lot of that is what other programs, nonprofits and for-profits, are experiencing, which thing. And then, of course, moving towards getting an urban campground. All of these pieces would eventually work together when they're all up and running and open. The urban campground would be a great place for people to come in, initially stabilize. The temporary winter warming centers or summer cooling centers would be there specifically for those life-threatening emergencies and life-threatening environmental situations like we're experiencing now. And we certainly saw about 117 people die last summer in those heat conditions across the state of Oregon. And then a shelter, whether it's running for 30, 90, 120 days or year-round, that would be a program that would be there to help people stabilize them in while they were looking for something more permanent, either longer-term stay at a campground or, depending on how they were doing in their life in other ways, coming a program like Foundry Village if there's room, or other more traditional affordable housing. Looking at other programs that are underway right now, one would be developing more of that traditional affordable housing, cottage development. That's in the works, planning right now. The goal would be to develop 12 affordable housing units in the city of Grants Pass. It would be rentals, and then just help kind of build up both that density, but then also the availability of some of those types of units at that level of affordability that the community really needs. Cave Junction is also working on putting together a shelter program. We're going to be learning more about that throughout the course of the year. There's a team very similar to the team that started looking at Foundry Village 3 years ago, a local steering committee that's bringing together the pieces that would be necessary to develop that out. You're going to need somebody who can do some on-site work, fiscal sponsor, volunteers on the ground, people who are willing to continue going to city council meetings and groups like this to really make sure people understand what is trying to be done and also hear the community's feedback so that anything that's developed is developed responsibly and taking it into account the needs of the folks that would be served by the program, as well as the needs of the neighbors in the neighborhood and the business owners who hopefully would also benefit from the program. That's kind of the scattershot for what's happening in the community right now, but I really want to underscore how far Grants Pass has come in the last 4 or 5 years, and this work that community advocates have done and the work that City Council has done to remove barriers in the city development code that prevented homeless services from even happening for adults in most of the city, and that's a recent change just last fall. And then being able to open programs like Foundry Village and having the teamwork and the support necessary and the funding necessary to get those programs open, keep them sustainable, and then help really addressing people's needs and helping hopefully to change and improve lives. Yes, sir.
Would a cooling shelter or a cooling center be also what would be sought after for the summer months when it becomes extreme heat, similar to a warming center for the winter months?
Yeah, so the question for folks at home is, would we also be looking to have cooling centers in the area as well as a warming center? So yes, the cooling center actually is a little bit easier to run logistically. Last year there was a partnership between the food bank, the city, and the United Newman Methodist Church downtown. The nice thing is that when it's hot enough, or the convenient thing is that when it's hot enough that you would want to open a cooling center, it's also hot enough that a lot of the summer volunteers and the summer staff out at the Josephine County Food Bank's Raptor Creek Farm, they're not going to be out picking vegetables. And so you've got folks that are looking to hand to make the community safer, who also have some time on their hands because they can't go out and do the work that they signed up to do. And so a lot of those folks just came right over to the church, and then we're able to operate those daytime hours for the cooling center. Nighttime shelters are a little bit harder because for the most part, folks weren't already planning on working and volunteering at night. And so then that's part of why those winter warming centers are a little bit more difficult.
Keep going, you're doing fine.
Yeah. Okay. Well, barring any other questions, I'm going to, oh, yes, ma'am.
I have a question, Sam. Is anything being planned for those who are living in their cars, who need a place to shower and bathroom accessibility and possibly, a place to eat?
So the question was, is anything being planned for folks that are living in their cars but need a place to shower, restrooms, toilet facilities, or a place to eat? And I would say yes. Any of these other programs could be accessible for somebody unsheltered, completely unsheltered, or unsheltered on the street, or unsheltered in a tent, or in their car. In terms of a straight, safe parking area, I haven't heard of a safe parking area that's in development in the city, but there's a couple of different programs that are looking at bringing back the shower. Seventh-day Adventist Church ran a shower time. They had some physical problems with the building and the utilities there, the plumbing, and I think either that's underway or there's another grant out in the community to do a mobile shower, but the location isn't confirmed for that yet.
So somebody is working on a shower?
Yeah, folks, the advocates are really enthusiastic that the local shower come back, and so people are trying to bring that back, but I don't have a timeline or a location yet, I'm sorry. Okay, and with that, I will turn it back over to Doug.
Can you make yourself co-host?
Oh, yeah.
Over there. So in a moment, I'm going to turn the PowerPoint on and go over a presentation there. But for all the people on Zoom, if you have questions, please write them in the chat box down at the bottom. And my wife, Bev, is over there. She's going to be my co-host on this thing and read off as they come up, or comments, because there's a couple of you on Zoom that might be able to answer questions better than those of us up here. So if any of you are out there want to answer a question that was asked, please do, and Bev will try to read it out to us. So I'm going to go to the Zoom world, try to do this without messing things up, and we'll start the presentation. Okay, come on now. Whoops. Oh, back. Slideshow from beginning. Okay. the woman who created this slideshow is not able to be here. She was the one that sort of spurred on these meetings, and she deserves a lot of credit for this, and also to going through the trouble of making the slideshow. Deb Harpster, she wasn't able to be here, but I do want to thank her out loud, too. She's the one that said, well, why don't we just start having meetings? Just quit talking about this and start doing something with some friends of hers at the dinner table, and then these meetings have started because of her. So I appreciate that. So we're going to talk a little bit about Medford's campground and what they've got going there and the success rate, the successes they're having, and here in Grants Pass, the idea is to mimic what they're doing while morphing it to what fits and what works in our community here. So I'm going to read this out loud because I think the people in the audience can't really see it very well. So those in Zoom world can probably see this, but I'm going to read it out loud for the audience here. So Rogue Retreat began operating Medford's urban campground in July of 20. Community partners provide on-site wraparound services, drug and alcohol counseling, mental health issues, housing, job readiness, and legal aid. Hundreds of thousands of tax dollars are saved due to the availability of medical treatment in the camp versus the routine use of ambulances to go to the emergency room and the emergency rooms themselves. Today in Medford, 50 tent sites and 25 pallet shelters are full to capacity with expansion plans underway. And this presentation was created about 2 months ago. Currently, I believe, Lisa can nod her head if I'm saying this right, but the Medford City Council has asked Rogue Retreat to find a permanent home because they're in a place they lease and to expand their capacities. And I believe the City Council of Medford is actually helping to fund a permanent site for an urban campground down there. So I believe the Medford City Council is happy with the campground and what's happening. Safe spaces. The Medford Police Department's livability team exclusively makes participant referrals, and then guests must fill out an application before being given a tent or shelter to use there at the urban campground in Medford. There's an 8-foot high privacy fence that borders the perimeter of the campground and provides screening for neighborhood businesses and also screening for the participants. Public viewing, unknown walk-ins, as well as camp participants. The front gate is locked from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m., while dedicated staff is on site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Hygiene there at the temporary site. The current site in Medford is on an old cattle butchering site, a cattle processing site. And so there aren't facilities available for them to use, such as bathrooms. So everything's done with porta potties and with hand washing stations and with water tanks. Meals are provided by various organizations in Medford. Some churches provide on certain days, and a few other, I don't remember what they were. I saw a list of the different entities that provide meals there. The tent areas, this is kind of a lot of questions that comes up in conversations about the campground and what it is we propose. But it's going to basically look like this, which is a row of sort of car cover canvas things where the tents are underneath, and each participant has a 10 by 10 space, and they have to keep all their stuff inside that 10 by 10 space. So it's very neat and organized, and it has to be, or it can become chaos rather quickly. And then there are also an area of pallet shelters. Pallet shelters, for those in Zoom, can probably see those pictures fairly well, but in the audience, they're basically small one-room buildings that have a bed in them and a little desk area. I'm not sure the size of those things. And they have plastic walls. They were originally created for emergency pop-up setup during disasters, but the Medford area has been able to buy, I think, about 50 of them. Grants Pass also has about 20 sitting ready for use at one of the city of Grants Pass utility sites or something. They're in storage there at a warehouse or something. So we have about 20 of them or so in Grants Pass. So how's it going in the Medford area? Follow the rules. So people must adhere to the rules in the campground or they'll have to leave. Rogue Retreat campground participants are required to engage with community support specialists, take steps towards addressing the barriers stopping them from re-engaging in society. The use of drugs or alcohol or possessing of paraphernalia is forbidden while inside any of the shelters or in the campground. That includes weapons. They have to check those in at their lockers. Let's see, what are the benefits of a campground? Instead of living in an environment not meant for human habitation, people are given their own tent, lockable storage containers for important documents and belongings, use of porta potties, hot meals, and medical support. Most of the staff had their own troubled pasts and provide excellent peer support and trusted communication with guests in the campground. When people stay in one central location, it's easier to have sustained case management, and results show a higher rate of success on the continuum of care of the homelessness and the participants in the program. So call to action, what can some of you do if you're interested in being involved? Educate yourself with facts about what we're proposing as a campground. Maybe take a tour. The Urban Campground in Medford, they do give tours. I don't know what the schedule is, but I think they ask that people call down there, set up a schedule, so it would be just a call to Rogue Retreat in Medford, and then they'd schedule a tour of it. Talk to family and friends about the idea of a campground and share verifiable information. Talk to your local politicians. There's a couple here. Thank you for showing up here too as well. There's a couple city councilors here today. And then be willing and ready to volunteer to help or be involved in some way or another, either at the warming center that Sam talked about, the urban campground shelter, or Foundry Village. Although Foundry Village is not really taking volunteers right now, so I shouldn't say that. But when the campground, if we are able to get the campground moving forward, there's going to be a fairly long construction period, 6 months, 8 months, where things get ramped up and ready to go, and certainly need a lot of volunteers at that point. I am going to try to exit out of this and go back to Zoom, if I can. Sam, do you mind giving me a hand here? How do I get from this to back to the main screen? Stop share, that's what I got to do, right?
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Got it.
Do you mind if I make a quick announcement?
Go right ahead.
And then just for the folks at home too, on the chat, it was disabled for a minute, but if you go in and when you're sending messages, please send them to the moderator, because Doug is presenting and may not see your messages, but we will make sure to capture them over on the moderator screen. Thank you.
So the current efforts right now in Grants Pass are to find a location for an appropriate campground, work with the city and figure out how they want to proceed. The city council and the city has some money that they think they're going to earmark for a campground. There's some details that have to get out with the city as to how that grant would happen or how the city would choose to participate in either buying land or finding land that they can lease. So there's some discussion within the city council right now amongst itself on how best for them to proceed to move forward with a campground. Retreat has continued to affirm the fact that they will willing to manage the facility. Again, they'll have the same problems as they're having now, which is finding staff, so it may take a good 6 months before they're able to get it open. But I do believe the intent is to take staff that they've hired for the shelter, which is in the works right now, take that staff and transition them to the urban campground if the timing can work out for that. Some of the things we're looking at for a site, we've gone through about 20 or 25 various pieces of vacant land. Most are not for sale, some are not appropriate, and then those that are appropriate and for sale, we've whittled it down to about 4 or 5 pieces of property right now that are viable. 2 or 3 are sort of genuinely for sale, and 2 or 3 of those have said, well, I guess it's for sale, maybe, maybe not, come talk to me later about it, sort of thing. We're looking for a minimum of about 2 acres. 3 acres would be preferable, which would give us enough space for potential parking area for those that are sleeping in their vehicles. Don't necessarily need a tent, but they need a safe place to put their vehicles. But we need a lot of space for that. So ideally it's 3 acres, but 2 acres would work. Sometimes what would happen, I think, with 2 acres or a little bit less, is some of the extra services that show up during the day would just have to be out on the streets. Whatever their vehicles are, would have to end up being out on the streets. So we may end up bleeding out into the streets. Let's see, there's a FAQs back explain a little bit about the campground. I don't know if anybody had any questions from them. I have a few questions here from people in the audience. I'll read a couple, and then maybe Sam, you can do a couple of the chats, if you don't mind, from the Zoom land. So question from the audience is, how many of the prefab shelters do we have in storage? I believe it's in the neighborhood of 20. I don't know if somebody knows the number to that's out in the audience. 25? Yeah, okay, it's somewhere in that neighborhood, 20, 25. So those would be put up at the urban campground as well. And what seems to happen in Medford, and I assume it would be similar here, the participants that show a level of success and capacity to move up will go from a tent to one of the shelters where they have more free space, they can bring more things, they have heat, I think, if we can get them hooked up to power. So they're sort of a step up from the tents and everything. So next questions. Urban campground, how large of a campground? So we're looking for a minimum of about 2 acres. Campground host, 24 hours a day, yes. One of the big issues here, and that's been kind of of our struggles, is to identify the funding from state and federal and grant agencies to be able to pay 2 staff people 24 hours a day. Law enforcement, yes, the city has a very successful, what's the name of the city's, does anybody know the city? Well, yeah, but they call it something else. The ESO, which stands for? Which stands for? Community Service Team, yes. So our city police has a community service team that's very successfully been working with various agencies in town, options, and other mental health agencies and those kinds of things. And they are the part of the city police that deals with homelessness and those kinds of things. And they will be integral in deciding who it is that goes to the campground and whether they're fit for that. Potential liabilities, I am not sure how to answer that one. We certainly have insurance and will have insurance. And that's what's meant by liabilities. Who will pay for maintenance and utilities, grants, donations, and funding from the state. Most funding for the facility comes from Medicaid reimbursement. Next question, government campground check-in, check-out policy. I don't know the details to that, so I can't really comment on it. There are policies about that, and there's daily check-in and check-out, maybe not daily check-in and out, but in the hours check-in and out. And then there's the policy of actually registering and being a participant at the campground. And I don't know much of those details. I can't really talk about it. 14-day limit, no, I don't believe there's any limit at the campground in Medford, nor is there reservations, but the participants at the campground in Medford, and assuming it's going to be similar here, are recommended by various agencies. Monitoring reports. I don't know of any reports that are required. I believe we will give a report regularly to the city, let them know how it's going, but I don't know of any other agencies that require reports. Create any staff positions. Yes, there are positions being created to staff the urban campground. Sam, do you have any from chat you want to read? Sam's going to come up here and then he's going to do some of the questions that showed up on the chat.
Hi again. Okay, so looking at chat, first off, we have a comment from RCC letting us know that housing and student housing is one of the most frequent requests that they get for student support, just underscoring the need for housing, low-income housing, and affordable housing solutions in our community. A note that that local team is referred to as the CRT, or the Community Response Team. This question, is there a date established for when is there a date in mind for when the land should be purchased? And I think the answer for that is just as soon as we have the right land available and the funding to purchase it, that would be the right time. We thought we were pretty darn close back in November, and now we are exploring land opportunities, and then and looking at what the grant arrangement for the ARPA funding, the American Recovery Plan Act funding, would be. That is on the City Council's workshop for Monday. So that answer is in development still. A request, please let Zoomers know where you can find and access the list of FAQs online. We can share it with others. I'll put my email in the chat here in a minute, and folks can just email. I'll send that out to anybody who would like it. There was a survey taken a couple of years ago before the fires, and over 50% of students on campus are insecure. Even more are food insecure, about 64%, meaning students have had to skip a meal a week or just not eat several times a week. Again, this is coming from a student support person at RCC. I can refer students to SNAP food stamps, but housing, it's like you're on your own out there. When you're a student, you shouldn't have to be thinking about where you're going to sleep tonight and where you're going to get food, which is an excellent comment on housing as a social determinant of health, leading to academic outcomes, which leads to financial outcomes, which leads hopefully to the reduction in the need for affordable housing over time. And that is the contents of the chat at the moment.
Thanks, Sam. So I want to touch on a subject that some of us here in the audience, Sam, myself, and others, also work at the city as a volunteer on the Housing Advisory Committee, and so we deal with various housing issues and trying to find ways to create more housing in the community. And the homeless housing issue, which is kind of what we're here to talk about, and then talk about an urban campground, it's really a byproduct of the housing crisis we have, which is our shortage of housing and the high rents we have. And so ultimately, most homeless people are economically homeless. They're homeless because they can't afford rent, and something happens sideways in their life, and then they end up out on the street. So really, the big answer to this over the next 20 years is the housing crisis on the West Coast of the United States, and then our little part in it. And we the volunteers, city council, city staff are working very hard to try to find ways to get more things built in town, and I assume all the other towns on the West Coast are doing the same thing, which we do hear that kind of stuff. So ultimately, this is a crisis. This is a housing crisis, but the most vulnerable people end up being homeless, and that's what we're here to talk about. So some other questions from audience members. Will attendees be screened for warrants before being admitted? I don't think so. Lisa, if you know an exact answer to that, tell me, but I don't think they're screened for warrants, but they are, most of the attendees or the participants at the campground are likely to come through recommendations from the police. So I would assume that if there was a problem with that person, the police would know about it. Next question, how will urban campground eliminate homeless issues in the city parks? So the urban campground won't eliminate, not a quid pro quo, do this and that happens, but the urban campground is probably the first and biggest step to the idea of getting the great majority of homeless people out of the parks. This campground will give a place for homeless people to go, which is one of the things that the lawsuits that have gone through the courts have said. You can't make it illegal to live in the parks if there's no low barrier alternative for them to go to, and this is that low barrier alternative. So I believe it's the first big step on that. But again, it's not a quid pro quo sort of thing. And then the next question on the card is a proposed site. We don't have a proposed site yet. We have a few, again, that we said that we've looked at that are viable, but we have to get further down the process before we start to talk about one site or another. And then I think the next step would be City Council deciding how they want to handle the grant process, and then going from there. Next question, what are the responsibilities of a volunteer at the shelters, warming center, et cetera? I guess that would vary what's being asked of them, so I don't think I can answer that. When I volunteered 2 years ago at the warming shelter center, whatever it was the old DMV building, I did a one shift a night. I think it was 10 to 7 or something like that, and I basically sat there for a couple hours, in the very beginning, not much to do, just be at a second body there, and then we cleaned, and then we prepared breakfast, is what I did. And then we woke people up, gave them coffee, gave them their little breakfast, and got them out, and then we started cleaning again, and that was about it. Volunteering, is it a safe environment for the volunteers, especially at night? I found it safe, but I'm a guy, so I don't know. So if it's a woman asking this, it's hard to say. Everybody has a different level of thought about safety, but it felt safe, and there were plenty of women. I think, Nancy, did you volunteer at the shelter? No? Can you hear me? No? Okay. I know Geneva did, and Geneva's in her 70s, I think, and she volunteered at the shelters too. So I think there are women that were comfortable volunteering there. That's all the questions I have. Are there any questions in the audience about this? It's gone a lot faster than the last one did. No? Any questions on Zoom then? Yeah, I do have one. Okay.
There were two hands up here.
Oh, yeah, please, stand up, or just speak out loud, I hear you.
Another question, because you got my question and answered it. A little concerned about the screening for warrants for people's arrests.
Right,
So that's a big concern of mine,
right.
is that we're allowing people with warrants for arrest for whatever crime is out there. Now, I get that the police are involved, but I don't think they're the only ones, or are they sending referrals to you for people that they would naturally screen out warrants?
So first, the process hasn't been developed yet. So until it's there, the campground is there, the process isn't exact yet. So based on what they're doing in Medford and based on meetings with the local police, there probably will be other agencies. And whether those people have warrants out with them or not, I don't know. I can't say we're going to screen for that because I don't know that that'll happen or not. So that's your basic question. Will you screen for warrants? And I can't answer that. I don't think so, because I think there's been conversation where somebody might be referred from options. An option says this person's viable, they need a place to stay, they fit the criteria, they're not violent, they're not dangerous, all of those things. They may have a warrant. I don't know. We don't know. At the moment, that person you're referring to is sleeping in a park or sleeping anywhere. So if you had that person with a warrant sleeping at a controlled, regulated, supervised site, is that not better than sleeping in the blackberry bushes or in the camp? Because right now we're offering an alternative to what exists currently, is unsupervised, unregulated, sleeping kind of anywhere. And that seems like a better option, even though somebody there may have a warrant out for their arrest.
It comes to the safety of the men and the women that we are already been talking about.
Correct, and the participants there and their safety, right, yeah. Sam, go ahead.
Well, and kind of to the safety question, we do have a couple of comments that have come into the chat too. One from Todd, who works at Rogue Retreat. Safety is #1 priority on the sites, and so especially looking at volunteers, recognizing that women are staying in the shelters and staying on the campground, and so the safety is extremely important for the folks who stay there, as well as the folks who are volunteering, and then for staff as well, and for the neighbors in the neighborhood. So safety, top priority. We also had a comment from a retired RN who volunteered at the warming center that she felt very safe in that space. Again, to Doug's comment, I volunteered there, I felt safe, but also my circumstances are different than other folks. And then something else with the warrants. We do tend to get very concerned about what if. What if somebody is violent? What if somebody is scary? What if somebody's different than I am and I don't know what their circumstances are? And these are legitimate questions. A warrant can also be for a parking violation. So after our last meeting, one of the things that we did as a team is we sat down with Chief Hensman and a couple of other folks from Grants Pass Public Safety to talk about how do we make sure that we're moving forwards with this really well. Grants Pass Public Safety was part of the steering committee for Foundry Village. This is really supposed to be a transparent process that addresses everybody's needs and concerns. So again, safety, highest priority for everybody involved. The whole point of this is to make people's lives easier and safer, and for the whole community. It's in nobody's best interest to sleep in a doorway. It's in nobody's best interest to sleep in the park. whether that's the person who's sleeping there, the business owner, your kid, your grandkid. This isn't in anybody's best interest. And so we want to create a better solution for the community. One of the reasons we're so excited to work with Rogue Retreat is that Rogue Retreat doesn't just offer a room or a door or a tent for someone to stay in. They offer comprehensive case management services. They take stock of where somebody is in their life when they come in, and that could very well be legal. And then where that person wants to go in their life and where they're able to go. And so something like clearing up outstanding warrants, dealing with legal concerns, because a lot of those legal concerns are barriers to employment, those are barriers to other forms of housing. We want to get those legal concerns addressed so that somebody can take those next steps in their life. And so we would want to get them into case management, into some form of stable housing, so that it's easier to address those concerns and then help progress someone forwards. But looking at whether somebody's going to be a good fit for the environment, which is a big part of what Lisa does, is interviewing folks to see if they're going to fit with Foundry Village, if they're dangerous, if they're violent, if they need to go to another, lower acuity form of care first. They can be prepared to come into somewhere like Foundry Village, and that's really what we want that campground for. Help get people stabilized, help get people off the street, address some of their personal barriers so that they can then move forwards. And I think the short version of that is we want to use some of these programs to help people deal with their outstanding warrants, as opposed to that being a condition of coming in the first place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, maybe I should rephrase the question. I guess there's categories of warrants which we've established. Hard crime warrants would be my biggest concern.
And that makes perfect. So for folks at home who may not have heard that, the question really wasn't about warrants in general so much as hard crime warrants or danger to the environment they'd be coming into. Lisa, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the screening and interview processes.
I think you've addressed it really well, Sam. I really don't feel like I have anything more to add to that. Yeah, we do an interview process. People fill out an application. All of those pieces are at that time. So I don't know what more I could add to what you've already said. You said it so well.
Yeah, I'd add that in meetings with Rogue Retreat and the police officers and various other entities, the term predatory and dangerous seems to be a term that is used as a sort of a cutoff barrier. If this person displays predatory behavior or something past record shows predatory or hostile, or not hostile, but violent behavior, then they're not allowed. They're just left to go continue living where they're living. So that's, and I don't know if there's a clean line to say, this is what that is, but that's been the term that's been used by them in various meetings. We have had a few with parole and probation to try to determine some sort of policy for the campground around sexual offenders. And so what we've decided is, based on parole and probation meetings with them, there aren't any standard guidelines for every sexual offender that we could just follow. Currently, the way it's done is each offender has a different probation set. It's different for every person. So what we decided through with the parole and probation was we would just follow their guidelines, and then we would go above and beyond that by saying we're going to try to find this campground that's going to be 1,000 feet from any school. That's not a requirement by the state for sexual offenders. It's something we're also going to do ourselves. One of the funny, odd things about that is the city staff has been really gracious and helpful in creating maps to show where different things lie. So we say, okay, yeah, any land over here in this area doesn't qualify, it's within 1,000 feet. And one of the schools is one of the things that shows that map that says you can't be within 1,000 feet of this is the circle around the juvenile prison behind Walmart, and they send the people there to school to get the GED, so that's considered, so there's a 1,000-foot barrier there. And so I've sort of ignored that. I hope that's okay with everybody. And when looking at land, so other land, most of that area around behind Walmart, and then a good portion of it down the Spalding Avenue area would be out of viability if we followed that 1,000-foot rule, 1,000-foot buffer from the youth prison school. So I have been ignoring that part. Any other questions? Yes, sir, in the green, and then,
Thank you very much for putting this together today. And my question is, when the urban campground site is chosen, grants passed, will the adjacent property owners be given the chance to comment?
I would say yes, but it's only because I think we're going to do that, but I don't know if the process requires it, if that makes sense. The permitting, I don't know that the permitting process requires it, but we will do that. And we're going to probably have at least 2 more meetings like this. We'll actually go to neighborhoods and say, hey, come to a meeting. Whether that's the neighborhood where the sites are going to be, we don't know, because there's, like I said, there's about 4 or 5 viable sites, 6 sites, and a couple that are at the top and those at the bottom. And so we'll do that, but we'll try to have 1 or 2 more meetings like this where we actually just invite the neighbor to something in their area where they can come and hear about it. So yes, I think.
How many people do you totally plan to serve?
Well, Road Retreat has set a limit of 70 sites. They said 2 staff people can handle 70 sites, and 70 sites means a max potential of 140 people, 2 people per site. Aren't ever 2 at every site, but that's the theoretical max. So they've said 70. And that includes the first discussions about car camping. 70 sites includes the car camping sites. I suspect once it's up and operational, the car camping sites may be less burdensome, and so they might be able to expand that, but that's something that'll have to get worked out over time once they know what the workload is and just how much effort it is for case management with the various people. Because right now, most of the car campers, they're spread out through town, and if we could provide them a safe site where they could access bathrooms and showers, they may be very low-maintenance homeless people, and so they may be easy to have 20 more car sites there. But that'll be to determined, and that'll be arguments we have behind the scenes about whether we can serve more people or not. Yeah, Sam?
Would you try and repeat the audience question?
Yeah, I forgot to do that, sorry.
Getting questions from the chat.
Yeah, sorry about that. So the question I just answered was maximum number of people at the campground. And then the previous question was, once a neighborhood is decided, or once the location is decided, will the neighbors in that location be given an opportunity to have, to be able to comment and respond and have input in that whole process? Yes. And so this meeting is part of that whole process too. And hopefully people will hear about these meetings and come to them. Any other questions out there? No? Sam, is there anything else on chat?
No, we are not up.
All right, wonderful. Well, this was nice and easy then. Okay, well, I think that's it. I appreciate you all coming here. If you have any other questions or comments or want to send us anything or talk about something, please either send it to us via email if you've seen the email by way of knowing about this meeting, or however. Thank you. Sam, are you able to capture the chat comments? I don't want to end the meeting without doing that. Yes, thank you, Tom.